Welcome to our Curious Amalgam, the weekly podcast brought to you by the Antitrust Law section of the American Bar Association. Our Curious Amalgam explores the fascinating and increasingly overlapping world of competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law. Each week, we bring you leading global experts on the most compelling issues of the day. Enjoy the show.
Hello and welcome to Our Curious Amalgam, the podcast from the American Bar Association Antitrust Law section. My name is John Roberti, and our topic today is Do You Understand the Game? Competition Law and Esports. There has been a robust history of antitrust intervening and being considered in all kinds of traditional sports leagues. Going way back to the original exemption for Major League Baseball and onward to famous cases involving the National Football League and other sports league. What we're interested in learning about today is the next generation of sports, esports, and whether some of the same issues that apply to traditional sports apply to them and whether there are new and different issues that also should be considered. My co-host today is Michele Lee. Hi, Michele.
Hi, John. How are you?
Good. Thank you. So, Michele is joining via the Curious Internet link. Michele, what are we doing today?
So, John, imagine that you're at Madison Square Garden. You've got 18,000 seats filled to the brim, enthusiastic fans roaring. Is it just another Knicks basketball game or a Beyonce concert? Not this time. Instead, it's the League of Legends World Championship semifinals, a video game where players control a champion with unique abilities and battle against other teams. Players are taking center stage at Madison Square Garden, where enormous jumbotrons are showcasing each player's every move. Welcome to the world of e-gaming. It's $1 billion industry where top players can earn thousands of dollars in prize money.
And do we see antitrust law issues coming up in esports?
So e-gaming is pretty much still a new frontier, but much like traditional franchises, sports leagues, sponsorships, and star players, the legal issues that relate to traditional sports leagues, there are similar considerations in this new frontier of e-gaming and esports.
All right. Well, Michele, who are our guests today?
So our first guest is Derek Ludwin. He co-chairs Covington's Antitrust Litigation and Sports Practice Group, and he advises clients on high-stakes antitrust litigation, transactions, licensing, and compliance issues. His practice focuses on the intersection of sports and antitrust, and he regularly represents the NFL and other sports leagues, teams, and organizations, and he is surprisingly proficient at Clash Royale. Can't wait to hear all about that. Our second guest is Alexander L. Simon, who's a litigator at Pearson, Simon & Warshaw's Sherman Oaks office. He is focused on complex class action litigation, including antitrust and consumer protection cases. And luckily for us, he is an avid gamer and occasionally also streams on Twitch.
All right, well, let's bring our guests. Derek, Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
How you doing?
So Alex and Derek, I'd love to hear a little bit more about the explosive growth of esports at the professional and collegiate high school levels and just how this phenomenon of e-gaming has come to be. Alex, do you want to start us off there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, since I was a little kid, video gaming has been a big thing, but more recently, it's sort of moved mainstream. When I was a kid, playing video games was not necessarily the coolest thing. But now it's like you have professional video gamers on commercials and things like that. And one of the ways that it's really become mainstream is actually having esports teams at colleges and scholarships related to those esports teams. It's actually really, really amazing. It's totally changed. The gaming atmosphere has totally changed, and in my opinion, for the better.
And Alex, tell us about these leagues. How are they built up? Who's running them? How do they hire players in the leagues?
Well, it's a little bit of a complicated question. So they're built up basically up from the ground. Players who are in the top ranks in the games. So a lot of times there's leadership boards within games. and players who have the best win ratio in certain games or all-stars in those games will often join teams, and those teams will form, and then there'll be competition. But I know Derek is a little more familiar with the teams probably and how those are formed than I am.
Well, you're right. It is complicated, and it like in traditional sports, it varies from league to league and from sport to sport. If you think about League of Legends being a sport, and Overwatch and others, they're all e-games, e-sports. They all compete against each other for viewers and for players, but they all have they're all different. The same way that playing soccer is a little bit different than playing football. And they attract, amateurs. They attract people who buy the game and play the game. And as Alex said, some of the players get really good. And as the leagues have formed professional level gaming, you have teams that are either franchises or otherwise are associated with a league for a particular game. And they hire players, and these players train, and they have coaches, and they compete. Some of these games, these esports, are team sports, not individual sports. So you have teams of players working together to achieve a goal, whether that's to protect a position or attack a position or the like. So you have these players, and they have contractual relations with the teams.
So for our listeners who are listening to this podcast now, if they decide, this is it, I would like to dive into this world of esports, how do I become a good player, and how do I get picked up on a team?
Well, I think that's the $1 million question right there. I mean, so as somebody who's played a lot of video games, I'll tell you that people who are playing on these esports teams are cut above your normal person sitting in their house playing video games. The skill required to become good at games like League of Legends or Overwatch, like Derek mentioned, or Call of Duty or some of the other games is ridiculous. The hand-eye and mouse coordination to be able to become proficient at those at a high level is akin to being a star quarterback in the NFL. So I would say to you, start practicing now. But it's really amazing what some of these players can do.
I would say, like in any other sports, it's a choice of how much you want, how much you want to play. Some of us run or do exercise socially. Some do 5K, some do 10Ks. Some play in college or run in college, and you go on, and some run for the country and some run professionally. And it's no different in esports. You have a base of players who have purchased the game or playing the game. The games are sold in different manners. But the short of it is, as Alex said, you have some who are very good and take it very, very seriously. And then there are opportunities both to compete at the amateur level and move up the leaderboards, to compete. Some high schools are starting esports clubs. Some colleges, as Alex said, have esports teams. And then, at some stage, you reach out and try to get a team attracted to you, or vice versa.
So, John, I think they're telling us we really need to start practicing right about now.
Some of us may be over the hill.
So tell us a little bit about the legal implications. What are the legal issues that you're frequently encountering in this space?
Alex, you want to start that?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we've come across, or is kind of interesting, is as opposed to a normal sports league, football, soccer, the leagues or the game developers in this instance have control over all of the intellectual property relating to the game. So as opposed to maybe the NFL, where like if I want to go play football in the park with my friends and start a league, like there's nobody that really can stop me from doing that. In esports, for example, Riot Games has full control over League of Legends and how they balance the characters, how they change the powers, and developing everything related to that. And I, as a player, or someone who wants to create a league, are subject to their control on how they want to handle game dynamics as well as other things.
Derek, I know you've represented some traditional sports leagues as well. The model that Alex just described, is that common where it sounds like there's basically one owner of a particular esport league. Is that a common model, or is there a different model that you'd see in more traditional sports league?
Well, as Alex said, I mean, there's the game of football, and the NFL puts out a product called NFL football with the NFL rules and all the NFL investment in that particular version of the game. The Big Ten Conference does the same, and high schools do the same, and the like. And Alex on the field on a Saturday is playing that game as well. The difference is, in order to have an e-sport, an e-game, you need a publisher that is supporting that game and is putting out the software and the coding and balancing the characters. And without that publisher, there's no more game. You can't go out into a field on a Saturday and just start playing your own version of League of Legends. You don't have the software, the hardware, the coding, and the like.
Are we seeing, similar to real world sports, there have been historically other football leagues like the indoor football league who have, tried and failed to gain traction. Is there some sort of natural consolidation that's been happening in the esports space?
I think from my perspective, the answer is no. And the difference is you have all of these different game titles and all of these different game publishers, and you have, a sort of set of consumers that, while dedicated to a particular game at a particular time, have demonstrated, and you see this with Clash Royale, which is no longer popular among the younger set in the way that it used to be. But people will move from games to game. That's both the viewership and that amateur base, which is obviously a huge part of the business model for these publishers. So what you have is a market in which there are popular games, and there are publishers who are more successful in putting out popular games, but you have sort of people coming in and out of, and titles coming in and out of this dynamic space. So I wouldn't call it consolidation.
Yeah, I think that Derek's right in that each game is a little bit different. But from my perspective, there is a little bit of grouping that happens between these games. So, for example, one of the game types that's become really popular in the last year, as probably anyone who has a child knows, is Fortnite, and Battle Royale has exploded in popularity. This Battle Royale type game has basically created a vacuum of competition where multiple companies are trying to make the best Battle Royale game. They're all different games, but they're all the same type of game under that umbrella. And what we've seen is multiple companies coming in and trying to take the lion's share of that gaming arena. But for some of the more classic games like Overwatch, which Derek talked about, or League of Legends, those games tend to be relatively individualized, and there's not a lot of people coming in and trying to usurp them. I mean, League of Legends is like so popular, it's unbelievable.
How critical are the personalities to esports? So, in more traditional sports, you've got an athlete who's committed to a sport and they bring sort of star power to their particular team. Are these individual e-gaming sports athletes, are they moving from game to game? Are they committed to a game on a standalone basis? How does that work?
I think the answer is yes. You have some who are committed and some who are less committed. And I'll throw something out that I think Alex will be able to expand on. Is what's interesting in this space is you have star athletes. You have players who are particularly good and attract a following, but equally important, you have other personalities who are maybe the analogy is they're analysts, or they're commentators, but they're influencers who, while not necessarily the best players in the game, are driving demand and sort of driving customers and amateurs to watch particular games or watch particular players in a way that I think is somewhat unique. Alex, what do you see that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that's really interesting when you look at professional sports players, I mean, the access you have to professional sports players is, as a consumer, is fairly limited, right? You see them on game day. I guess you can see them on Twitter or Instagram or those sorts of things. But for a lot of esports players, the access is quite remarkable. A lot of these esports players who become popular will stream on platforms like Twitch.tv, Mixer, and they'll do streams of 10 hours a day, and people are chatting into those players' chats, and you're really getting like a full look at who these people are. So the access is way more, and what comes of that is the personality of these players comes out more, and people become like Derek said, more attached to who these people are, and along with their skill.
Derek and Alex, I'm trying to think about where antitrust law comes in here. In traditional sports league cases, as I've read them, I think a lot of them are brought up as Section 1 cases, so illegal agreement cases that kind of are dressed up as exclusion. Somebody wants to be in the club and they can't be in the club, or somebody wants to produce a licensed product and the league as a whole won't license them, and because they're different teams, that's a problem. Do the same sorts of problems come up in esports, or does the IP landscape change any of that?
The answer to that one is yes. You have the same questions that traditional sports leagues have faced and will continue to face. The esports leagues have to take into consideration in thinking about, as you said, as licensing and franchising and the like. But the intellectual property overlay that Alex talked about provides a slightly different framework for thinking about, to what extent you really have, separateness or an ability to collude, among sort of the league and the teams when the league is the publisher here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think one area that particularly relates to antitrust potential violation areas is this with the creation of esports it's basically created a market for all sorts of products related specifically to esports and streaming. And so what that's created is sort of like a race to who can be the best streaming platform program, who can be the best energy drink, who can be the best gaming chair, and all these sort of things. So I think that area is, as companies sort of feel it out and inevitably one rises to the top, that's an area where potential antitrust violations could show up as well.
I think Alex is right, but I look at it from the other side there, which is, what we're seeing is all of this competition being stimulated by advertisers and suppliers of other kinds, to these publishers or to these leagues, and you're seeing that in sort of rising popularity of some of these platforms that Alex talked about. I think that the rise of esports has been good for competition in all of those respects.
I'll give him that.
How has the focus on Twitch and other streaming broadcasts, impacted the gaming world? Are there any exclusive agreements for streaming certain games, or has it not gone in that direction?
I think Twitch has had Twitch and Mixer. I should mention the other platforms as well. There's Twitch, Mixer is another one, YouTube gaming, Facebook has a gaming platform. It's been really beneficial for gaming companies because it's basically free advertising. I mean, if you have somebody who's a popular personality on these platforms playing your game, you have tens of twenties of thousands of eyes watching that person play the game. It's been really, really beneficial for the game developers. And that's partly why I think the game developers let these players and content creators stream their content. Otherwise, there's potential intellectual property violations if I'm broadcasting a video game. But the game developers don't really care because, they're getting the eyeballs on their games, which is what they want.
Derek, last question. What are some of the key issues that esports publishers need to keep their eyes on to make sure that they maintain compliance?
I think this conversation has touched upon many. The questions they need to ask, and I think are asking, are sort of how are we going to structure our relationships with teams and with players and with what I would call suppliers with any of these other companies or people that are interacting with the game, whether it's Twitch or Mixer or in other areas, whether it's licensed apparel and the like. In that respect, the history and sort of learning from the traditional sports model is really, I think, helpful to the esports model, and they've been able to sort of come in almost ahead of the curve by sort of having that base of antitrust knowledge that we've all developed in the traditional model. But again, it's different because of this intellectual property overlay that Alex highlighted, and I agree with.
So we're going to shift gears slightly. Alex, I want to ask you a question. You typically work on the plaintiff side, as I understand it, in the antitrust world. What's fun about being a plaintiff's antitrust lawyer? Why do you like it?
Well, the great thing about antitrust law is it branches into multiple areas of life. So I get to learn about all sorts of different products in life, whether it's, computer parts or maybe more exciting things like sports leagues or video games. It's an area of law that branches into different areas of life. So, where maybe one day we'd be working on one type of product, the next day we're doing something totally different.
Derek, how about you? What's fun about being an antitrust lawyer?
At the risk of sounding boring, Alex nailed it. I come in the morning and I learn about what people are doing and how they are putting out new products, and they're excited about their companies. And I'm mainly defense side, but what that means is I spend a lot of my time helping companies think of how to avoid antitrust risk or mitigate that risk. So you're really working with people who have exciting ideas and helping them think about how to structure those ideas, and and if we need to defend them against challenge, we will. But part of the fun is thinking about it more analytically or creatively.
And Derek, if some of our listeners are interested in getting involved in antitrust law, or even more particularly sports antitrust law, what advice would you give them?
I fell into it to some extent. I found cases that I enjoyed and matters that I enjoyed, and those were antitrust. And I raised my hand and said, this is what I'm enjoying doing. This is what I want to do. And when I had the opportunity to work on a sports antitrust case, the light bulb went off. This is great. And I said, I would love to do this. I'll do this for any client at any time. And you have to be flexible in order to get the experience. There isn't 100% sports antitrust law out there for most people or anybody, as far as I know. But there, if you're willing to be flexible and get experience in other areas that you can then bring back to bear and keep your eye on what you're enjoying, you'll get there.
Alex, how about you? What advice would you give for younger folks who want to get into antitrust law?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is try to become an expert in areas that you're familiar with. Like I mentioned, antitrust law branches to all different parts of life. So if you are an expert in a certain topic, like video games, for example, use that to your advantage. From the plaintiff side, there's a lot of opportunity in different various areas of life for potential antitrust violations, and it just takes somebody to have a creative thought process in mind to figure out, where those could potentially be.
All right, Alex, staying with you. Tell us something that's unusual or unexpected about you that we wouldn't know if we just knew you professionally?
So my unusual fact is I'm actually a national champion rower from high school. We won the national championship for rowing in high school. That was back in Cincinnati. It was a good time.
Like crew? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, like crew. Yeah. So I did rowing in high school.
Not like a rowboat, like more like a 8-person thing.
Right, more like an 8-person back in my fitter, skinnier days. But we actually won the regional championships and then got to go back to Cincinnati and compete for the national championships and won, which was cool because it was our first national championship at our high school since like 1997.
Derek, how about you? Anything rowing national champions, anything like that, and that we would know about?
I can't match Alex on that. If you're asking about something so people wouldn't know, is I love to cook, and I learned to cook at a restaurant in a small town in Eastern Ontario. The restaurant was called Chez Piggy, and it was started by a band member of the Loving Spoonful.
Favorite dish?
I love all my children.
All right. Well, then let's go to our final segment, which is the Curious Hat.
And now it's time for the Curious Hat.
In my left hand, I have an actual hat, which has an actual set of index cards with actual questions on them. I'm going to ask Derek to pick 2 questions and hand them both to me. And I will ask Derek one and Alex the other. Okay, so Derek, question number 25. If you could have any animal as a pet, what would it be and how many would you have?
It would be a dog. I would have one, which is one more than my family will let me have.
What kind of dog?
Burmese mountain dog.
Interesting choice. Alex, what countries have you visited recently other than the United States?
So recently I visited Israel, which was really fun. And before that, Germany, France, England.
What countries have you not visited that you would like to go and see?
Oh man, I really want to go to Japan. That's where I really want to go. So hopefully I'll get to do that soon.
All right, great. Well, thanks everybody. And that brings us to the end of our Curious Amalgam. Please join us again next time.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of our Curious Amalgam, a competition, consumer protection, data protection, and privacy law podcast. It is produced and shared around the globe by ABA's Antitrust Law Section. The opinions expressed by the participants in this podcast are their own and do not necessarily represent their employer or other organizations. If you like what you heard or would like to become a member of the American Bar Association, please check out what the Antitrust section has to offer at ambar.org/antitrust. You can learn more about our podcast at ourcuriousamalgam.org. If you have comments, suggestions, or podcast ideas, please reach out to us at podcast@ourcuriousamalgam.com. Until next time, thank you for listening.